Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I'm talking about old Commander staples that I used to see in the format all the time, and I don't see much anymore. I like to do videos like this every once in a while, just to, for some nostalgic purposes, but also maybe probably more so for all those newer Commander players that have only been playing maybe for a few years that possibly have never even seen some of these cards before. It just sort of gives you an idea of how things used to be not that long ago. I'm not talking about back in like the early 2000s. I'm talking like 5-6 years ago. So funny enough, I was planning on doing this video already. EDHRec actually has a classic EDHRec where you can click on it and go look at, I'm not sure how long ago it was, but very, very long ago, probably even before I started playing the format, to see how things were back then. So let's do that first. So we go to the EDHRec website. Here it is. And they have this little button here. It says classic. And if you click on it, it takes you here, which is, oh, look at that, 2016. That is exactly when I started playing Commander. It would have been 2016, maybe late 2015. Certainly this is what the format would have looked like when I started playing the Commander format. And here you see top commanders and top cards. The top commander in the format was Aloro, Ageless Ascetic. Not a big surprise. This would have been probably right before Commander 2016 came out, obviously, with Atraxa and, because all of the four-color commanders from that set were all the most popular commanders in the format for a long while when I first started playing. But if we look at the top cards, here you go. Sol Ring, of course, number one. And obviously the number of decks, 23,000, this is the most. Now it's like in the millions, so big difference there as well. Command Tower, they actually have the lands here, right? Everyone who says, oh, Basic Island is the most popular card. No, it's not, actually. At least but back then, Sol Ring is still more popular than Basic Island. It's more popular than Basic Forest. This is shocking. Leechrid Swamp? What? I guess everyone just put it in their decks. This is another one where I was like, Goblin Mountaineer was in 12,000 decks? Really? I've never even heard of this card. Look at that. It's funny when you see things like that. Temple of the False God. There's certainly a card that was, look at it. One of the most popular cards in the entire format. It was more popular than Reliquary Tower even, and Evolving Wilds. Yeah, everybody played this card. Again, there's a card that I don't play Temple of False Gods in any decks anymore. Obviously, we got Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Solemn Simulacrum, Cyclonic Rift, right? Swords is not that high. And again, I will point out, the reason why Swords is way down here and not like number 2 or number 3 in the format like it is now is because it wasn't printed in every single set. Again, that's how it was back then. Swords was, I imagine it was kind of expensive. It used to be kind of an expensive card. It's a really old card, right? But of course, then they just printed it into Oblivion so that everyone could just auto-include it in all their decks. That's how that happens, right? Chromatic Lantern, obviously. Skullclamp, Counterspell. Gilded Lotus was obviously, again, that's another card that was sort of one of those auto-include cards in every deck. Darksteel Ingot, definitely a card that's fallen off. The numbers here are so much different than they are now. I wonder if Darksteel Ingot is even in 5,500 decks anymore. I don't know. I think there's probably a million better options. It's interesting to look at this. And as we get down this list, we get to, hey, Acidic Slime. Again, we're in the what? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 16, how's my math? 24, 32. So it was the 32nd most popular card in the format, it looks like. More popular than Path to Exile. Phyrexian Arena, right? And that is where I am starting with Acidic Slime. This was a card that you saw all over the place. People almost auto-included it in their green decks, and I almost never see it anymore. I would guess, and for me, I have Acidic Slime in a deck still, and I guess if you've never seen this card before, 3 green, ooze 2/2 with Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, destroy an artifact, enchantment, or land. So it was versatile removal, which of course is really, really important. And the land part was really, really important. Obviously for green decks, destroying artifacts and enchantments, piece of cake. The lands, actually it's not super hard for a green deck to destroy a land, but this was an option for all 3 on one card, right? Which you don't see much. And as I say all the time, it's stapled on a creature, so we can bounce it and blink it and, get it out of the graveyard, all that kind of stuff. And also, 2/2 Death Touch, pretty great, right? Great blocker. get in for damage real easy if you want to. It is a really fantastic creature still. I think 5 mana is kind of a lot for people to use as removal. I still have this in my Questing Beast deck because it is, I mean, it is still a decent removal option, and also that is kind of a Death Touch tribal deck, so obviously it fits. I think I still have this in my Tishana deck because, again, it's a great ETB creature. So I still have this in 2 decks. Man, hardly ever see it anymore, though. Used to be all over the place. Next up at number 9, we got Sadistic Hypnotist. 3 black human minion 2/2. Sacrifice a creature, target player discards 2 cards. Activate only as a sorcery. And this was, I don't want to say an auto include, but you certainly saw it very frequently in mono black decks. I mean, I'm sure this card still gets played. I'm sure people still have it. I saw it very regularly. It was probably one of my least favorite cards in the entire format. I don't know, things were different back then. Playing what I would consider nasty cards like this, I mean, it's a pretty nasty card. Playing cards like this was very common. I saw it all the time. Mind Slicer was another one that I hated, and that got played frequently. I saw it a lot. If you were in any sacrifice theme, it's just an auto include in there. Charade decks played it a lot. Also, of course, Nath of the Guilt Leaf was just an auto include there because, of course, you could just force your opponents to discard cards with it and then create another elf token and repeat the process. You know, again, that's a commander that used to be really scary. I should have put that in my scary video because that was almost a CEDH. It was a very competitive level commander back then. But people still played it in casual games, and people played this card in casual games, and I hated seeing it. I'm not saying any of these cards are bad or anything like that. They're just cards I don't really see anymore that I used to see all the time. Who remembers this card? Speaking of scary cards that used to get played in the format all the time, and I never see any more, Palinchron, 5 blue illusion, 4/5 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, untap up to 7 lands, pay 2 blue, return Palinchron to owner's hand. And again, if you are new to the format only for a few years, you probably have never seen this card before. This card was very popular in the format, and it was even a card that people wanted banned. It was one of those cards that as soon as you put 7 mana even, right? It's one of those cards that as soon as you saw it in a commander game, people were terrified. It's like, oh my, the game's going to end. Game's going to be over, right? And the reason why is because, of course, it untaps 7 lands, but you only have to pay 4 to return to your hand. So you could get into some really, it was pretty easy to combo off and create infinite mana with this. And of course, I'm sure, again, a lot of people who have been playing the Commander format long enough are already calling out the card that this comboed with, which will be my next card, Deadeye Navigator. And this card, even more so, was a card that very frequently I heard people call for it to get banned. That's right. This card, which I almost never see anymore, I haven't seen this card in ages, was a card that people wanted banned in the format. Obviously, it comboed with Palinchron for blue spirit 5/5 with Soulbound. It means you pair it with another creature, so that creature gets the ability as well, as long as Deadeye Navigator is paired with another creature. Each of those creatures has pay 1 and a blue, exile this creature, return it to the battlefield under owner's control. So with Palinchron, or with any of those creatures that untap lands, you could pay 2, blink it, it comes back into play, untaps a bunch of lands. So it was a very easy way to get infinite mana. But of course, people will point out, you got a 6 mana creature and a 7 mana creature. That's a really easy way to create infinite mana? That's right. Back then, this was a really scary combo that a lot of people played in their decks. I saw it all the time. Deadeye Navigator, again, was a card that people were calling to get banned because they hated it so much in the Commander format. It wasn't just with Palinchron. There was a lot of things that you would just go off with your Deadeye Navigator. It was considered to be too powerful. This 6 mana creature that just gives another creature the ability to blink was considered to be too powerful for casual Commander. If you played this in a casual game, likely people weren't very happy. That's how different things were back then. I mean, I'm sure it gets played. I know a lot of people will say, oh, I still have this card in this deck or that deck, and this still is pretty good in a blinking deck, but kind of slow, right? 6 mana creature, and then you need 2 more mana to eat. So if you want to do it that turn, if I want to blink that creature that's already in play, this is 6 mana, pair it with that creature, and then another, so 8 mana to blink a creature, right? So you really got to wait for the moment to go off with this card. And I guess by today's standards, cards like that are too slow, right? Speaking of possibly too slow, a very common win con with mono red decks, maybe one of the most common. Other than I am playing my Krenko deck and I just swarm you with goblins, Vicious Shadows was one of the most common. I just don't really have a great way to win with my mono red deck. So I'm going to throw Vicious Shadows in there because it just works in every strategy, works in every game. 6 and a red enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, you may have Vicious Shadows deal damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. So this fits every strategy because, of course, it's anyone's creature dying. You don't even need creatures in your deck. You just have to have your opponent's creatures dying. And you just shoot them, And again, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess if you had one guy with no cards in hand, because this deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards they have in their hand. So I guess if a guy has no cards in hand, it's going to be pretty hard for you to kill them with this, but that's not usually an issue, right? So you could very easily close out the game, right? This is a card, and it is still the case that you can do this, and I'm sure there are people playing this in certain decks where it does work really, really well, but it was such a common win con that it was almost an auto-include for a mono-red deck because it was so easy to close out the game. Once you play it, Blasphemous Act, everyone's creatures die, and likely you have enough damage to throw around to just kill all your opponents, right? So certainly not a card I see much anymore, though. Phyrexian Metamorph, 3 and a Phyrexian blue mana, Phyrexian Shapeshifter, 0/0. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact, in addition to its other types. So, of course, this is a card. They're still reprinting it in commander sets. Certainly everyone's going to be familiar with this. And people will say, I don't see it anymore. This would be, I guess, probably the only card in this list that I do still see it from time to time. Not a lot. I know it is still a relatively popular card in the format. And funny enough, I talked about this a few months back in my video about cards not worth the money, because this is actually still, funny enough, kind of an expensive card. It used to be even more expensive before they reprinted it a bunch. Even at $8 or whatever this is, still not worth it because we just have so many fantastic clone effects. The reason I'm talking about this card specifically, though, is because it was a really popular card in the format. Again, it was one of those cards you just threw into every deck. Now you're going to put this in a deck if you actually want to be copying something. If I'm in a copy clone deck, if I have a very important artifact maybe that I want to be copying, that's why I'm throwing them. I'm throwing this in my deck because I have a very specific reason why I want to. Whereas 5-6 years ago, this was just, it's one of those auto-include cards where it's just a phenomenal commander card that I just want to put in my deck because it's always good in a commander game, right? People just put it in there just because it's a good card. It fell into that category where, okay, at any point during the game, I can copy the best creature on the board or the best artifact on the board. Sounds like a good card, and possibly only for 3 mana, right? It was just considered a really, really good commander card that you just put in your deck because why not? And I don't see it that much anymore. Crux of Fate, that's right. 3 black sorcery, choose one, destroy all dragons or destroy all non-dragons. And of course, I think people are fairly familiar with this card. People do see it. Obviously, it's an auto including your dragon tribal deck. But that is likely the only place it's getting played anymore. And again, for people who are not aware, this was a very common board wipe in the commander format, just as a board wipe. I'm not playing dragon tribal. I'm just playing any old black deck. I'm just playing a mono black deck. People very frequently would put this as a board wipe in their mono black decks. Again, because there actually isn't that many great options. Funny enough, people always talk about, you think about black being really, really great at removal. I mean, if you look at black board wipes, Toxic Deluge is obviously the best. That was actually a really expensive card, so a lot of people couldn't afford to put it in their decks. Most people would go to Damnation next, and Damnation also was a really expensive card for a while, so people couldn't afford to put that in their decks. Where do you go from there, right? Black Sun Zenith was a pretty popular one. Again, that's another board wipe I don't see much anymore, but man, you got to put a lot of mana into that if you wanted to get every creature off the battlefield. Mutilate, I guess, is pretty good in a mono black deck only. I would definitely not play that card out of a mono black deck, but again, still not a guarantee you're going to get everything off the battlefield. If your opponent had a big scary creature, you might not get it. Crux of Fate was actually one of the highest rated, I would say, mono black board wipes in the format because there wasn't a lot of great mono black options. People would play this card just as a straight up board wipe. Destroy all non-dragon creatures, typically. And if your opponent was playing dragons, I guess you're just screwed. Or if your opponent was playing a dragon tribal deck, now you can just destroy all dragons. So it did actually work in that scenario. Obviously now, I think likely this card only gets played in dragon tribal decks, still in 56,000 decks on EDHRec, but of course there's lots of dragon tribal decks out there. I imagine it's only getting played in the dragon tribal decks. I don't know if anyone's just playing this as a board wipe now, but they used to. They used to just play this as a generic board wipe because it was one of the best options. Getting to the white removal, the last 3 cards on this list are going to be white removal, just to give you guys an idea, again, how much things have changed over the past 5 or 6 years. Face fetters actually used to be a very common removal option in the Commander format, and of course had been reprinted several times in Commander sets for that reason. 3 and a white, aura, enchant, permanent, so you can hit any permanent with this. When face fetters enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life. Enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So it was, it wasn't a fix-all. It was definitely, it could deal with a lot of situations. A really scary creature can't attack or block. If it had great activated abilities, you couldn't activate that. But also, of course, you could hit any permanent. So if your opponent had a really great Planeswalker, put this on their Planeswalker, right? The gain 4 life was like a nice little added bonus. This was a very common, I mean, it's not actually removal, of course, because it's not getting off the battlefield, but it was an answer. This was a very common answer in the Commander format. I mean, Darksteel Mutation, I guess I could throw it there too. Of course, that was a very common removal-ish kind of option in the Commander format that I don't see much anymore. But this one in particular, like, does anyone play this card anymore? I guess it would be pretty good in specific scenarios. I mean, enchantment tribal or auras, stuff like that. Certainly you would still play this, but only in those specific scenarios would you play a card like this. Whereas when I first started playing the format, people are just like, hey, I need, again, it's not removal, but I need answers in my deck. I'll throw face fetters in there. That's a great answer that can fix a lot of situations, at least temporarily. People played this card a lot in the Commander format. I never see it anymore. Another one, Crib Swap, was one of the most popular removal options in the entire format. Again, a card that has been reprinted in a bunch of Commander sets for that reason. And man, does anyone play this as just a straight up removal spell anymore? They used to. Exile target creature, its controller creates a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling. So I guess if you specifically want a changeling spell, and there certainly is some commanders that would want you to be casting this because of the changeling, maybe you want to be giving your opponents a creature. That also could be, there's some very, very specific reasons why you might want to be playing this card. But again, this was just played as a straight up, one of my best removal options for creatures in my deck is this card. And as we just looked at with the classic EDHRec, Swords to Plowshares was not one of the most popular cards. I mean, it was pretty popular, but it was fairly far down the list. And a lot of people would play this instead because, Swords to Plowshares wasn't reprinted in every single Commander set, so I didn't have any, so I'm going to use this instead. This was just an option, because I don't have a Swords to Plowshares, so I'm going to play this. Or Path to Exile, again, another card that was actually pretty expensive. I mean, I used to play Modern, and that was the most popular removal spell in Modern right before I started playing Commander. I mean, it probably still is, but back then, that was kind of an expensive card. For a Modern player, it was kind of expensive to get your hand on 4 copies of Path to Exile for your deck, so it was probably difficult for a Commander player as well. So this was the next best option. You can't afford a Swords or a Path to Exile, so Crib Swap is what you're going to use as your creature removal. This was a very popular card in the Commander format. I put it in a few decks of mine when I first started playing, but that was around the time when it was starting to lose popularity because they were reprinting Swords and Path in every single set. Certainly, I never see it anymore. By far, though, the removal spell, again, the 3 white removal spells in a row that we just get another bomb removal spell for the Commander format in like every set now. So cards like Oblation and Crib Swap and Face Fetters just are completely pushed out. I think a lot of people still really like this card. It is a neat card for a number of reasons. So 2 and a white instant, the owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into their library, then draws 2 cards. So of course, there's a lot of really neat ways to use this card. One of the big reasons though why this was one of the most popular removal spells in the entire format, and again was reprinted in C11, C14, C16, obviously C21 as well. The reason why is because they never used to have the tuck rule, right? Of course, the tuck rule being if you shuffled someone's or tucked someone's commander into their library, it just stayed there, right? Another reason why people liked Chaos Warp so much. Bant Charm was another removal spell that was played a lot for that reason. You could shuffle your opponent's commander into their library, and that's it. They just have to hope they draw it again. Of course, they changed that rule where if your commander goes in your library, you can put it back into the command zone. So for that reason alone, this card got a lot less popular. But again, it was just a great way to deal with any non-land permanent. It was super versatile removal. There was no generous gift back then. I mean, there was a lot of things that didn't exist back then. Now, again, we get a mono white card that instant speed deals with any permanent or any non-land permanent. We get a card like that in like every set now. So Oblation really got pushed out. It is still a fun card. You can even use this on yourself. I've seen people do that a bunch. I shuffle my token into my library and I get to draw 2 cards. Not a great draw option, but it is an option. If you're kind of in a desperate situation and you need to draw cards, you can do that. It's a fun political card. You shuffle your opponent's thing away and they get to draw 2 cards, so maybe they're not as mad at you. It is still a good card. Again, all these cards are good cards in the Commander format, but things have changed so much that cards like this that I used to see in like every single Commander game, I never see anymore. There you go, 10 cards that I used to see in the Commander format all the time in almost every game, and now I rarely ever see them. Things have changed a bunch. I encourage you to play some of these cards though, right? I mean, it is tough to ignore. Again, we get this fantastic white removal spell. Why would I play Crib Swap or even Oblation? Yeah, I mean, you could still play it. And I'm kind of moving more in that direction. I was the guy, and especially with removal, I like my removal to be efficient. I want to play the best possible removal. Now I'm sort of like, yeah, maybe I'll just whatever. When a great new removal spell comes out in white, I'm just like, my removal's good. It's certainly not bad, and maybe I'll even start playing Oblation again. Who knows? It is a fun card. You guys let me know if maybe you're still playing any of these cards. I'm sure you are if the archetype is specific enough to fit it. Certainly, I don't see them much anymore. Let me know in the comments below what you think. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.